Hi again, everybody. Welcome to Beyond Resilience. My name is Marcia Smith. I'm the president of Firelight Media. And you'll also see on your screen our ASL interpreter, Andrea Lust. Nice to see you again, Andrea. Thank you. And welcome. Just to say a word about who we are and what this is. Beyond Resilience is a series of curated conversations created by Firelight with the purpose of exploring the challenges, the strategies, and experiences of creating and distributing work during a time of crisis. Our slate of conversations takes a global and historical view of films created by filmmakers of color during critical periods of disaster, seeking to learn from the filmmakers, their communities, and the resilience born from those collective experiences. Beyond Resilience is typically a weekly series. Our next one will be the last for a couple of weeks, but I'm very excited about that one. Next Friday on August 7th at 3:30 Eastern, which is a different time, will be a Beyond Resilience conversation entitled The Life and Legacy of John Lewis. When we'll have Dawn Porter, the filmmaker who directed the recent film on John Lewis called Good Trouble, and my partner Stanley Nelson, who directed Freedom Riders. That's next Friday. We'll put a link to register for that event in the chat. Before we start, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement for the purposes of raising awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights. We all have the responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and the legacy of colonialism. I am right now in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts, on the land of the Wampanoag people. We encourage you to acknowledge whose land you sit on in the chat today and encourage you to take whatever steps you can to learn more about the history and the legacy of the people whose land you are on today. So, it's been a long week, hasn't it? Very excited to host this conversation with a group of very exciting filmmakers and thinkers in our community. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then we're going to get into a conversation. We're trying not to waste a minute. So we have with us today Grace Lee. Grace recently directed and produced And She Could Be Next, which is POV's first ever broadcast series, which is about women of color transforming American politics as candidates and as grassroots organizers. Grace was also a producer and director on Asian Americans, a groundbreaking 5-part PBS series that casts a fresh lens on US history through the stories, contributions, and challenges of Asian Americans. Grace is also a member of the documentary branch of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and co-founder of the national filmmaker-led collective Asian American Documentary Network, or ADOC. Hi, Grace. Marjan Safinia is an Iranian documentary filmmaker whose films examine identity, community, and social justice. With Grace Lee, Marjan produced and directed And She Could Be Next. Other works include Seeds and But You Speak Such Good English. Until 2018, Marjan was the longest serving president of the board of directors of the International Documentary Association and the first woman of color to lead IDA since its founding in 1982. She currently serves on the board of directors of Chicken and Egg Pictures. She is also a member of the Academy and one of 5 co-hosts of The D Word. Iyabo Boyd is the founder and director of Brown Girls Doc Mafia, whose mission is to bolster the creative and professional success of women and non-binary people of color working in the documentary industry and to challenge the often marginalizing norms of the documentary field. Prior to Brown Girls, Iyabo held positions in artist development, program management, and funding at the Points North Institute, First Look Media's Topic.com, Kickstarter, Doc Society's Good Pitch, Chicken and Egg Pictures, Tribeca Film Institute, and IFP. Iyabo is also a screenwriter, director, and producer of fiction and documentary projects that have screened at the Berlinale, Sundance, Tribeca, and Black Star Film Festivals. Hi, Iyabo. Our final panelist today is Geeta Gandbir, who is an award-winning director, producer, and editor. As director, she won Best Documentary at the News and Doc Emmys for I Am Evidence, and Best Government and Politics Documentary for Armed with Faith. As an editor, she won a Primetime Emmy for Best Editing for Spike Lee's HBO documentary series, When the Levees Broke, and also for the HBO film By the People, The Election of Barack Obama. Other films she edited include Mr. Dynamite, The Rise of James Brown, My Neighborhood, and also When the Levees Broke, all of which won Peabody Awards. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm super excited about this conversation, as I said, to pick up a conversation that is really a long-standing one in our industry. And I'm going to turn to you, Geeta, first to just tell us what are we doing here? What was the kind of immediate prompt for the conversation and the situation that we're in now?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I think the impetus for this was, as you said, this has been a long-standing conversation in the community, and I think in BIPOC communities, this has been going on for decades. For me personally, I came out of working, my first years in the film industry were with the great Spike Lee, and Sam Pollard was my mentor. And I worked for many, many years at 40 Acres. And I think leaving that space and entering sort of the larger film world, there was a little bit of a shock for me when it came to issues of diversity, because Spike was very conscientious about making sure that the team that on all of his films was diverse. And I think that again, branching out into the bigger world was it was news to me that a lot of places in the film world didn't look like that. And then I think in recent years, as particularly in the last, 5 years, with the sort of the rise of Black Lives Matter, again, that has been going on for much longer than that, but at least in our collective consciousness, there have been many, many conversations that we have been having and organizations that have been forming to sort of around this topic to empower BIPOC and to try to elevate not only our voices, but our positions, our input into the community, the larger film community. We saw the Oscars So White campaign, and now within the doc community as well. Hence the Brown Girls Doc Mafia has played a big role in that. ADOC has played a big role in the BDC, Firelight. All these organizations have existed, CAM, et cetera. I think that for me, this is this time, as we have been seeing again, enormous, protests on the street, the uprising that's happening around the recent murders of multiple folks, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, et cetera. And this conversation has been circulating again in our community. I think Stanley Nelson wrote an article, which I believe may be in the chat. Sonia Childress wrote an article, Iyabo Boyd wrote an article where we've been asking about making sure that that BIPOC are telling their own stories, because there have been a lot of stories around the protests and the uprising. A lot of people have been wanting to latch on to this moment, but it is critical that we are involved in the telling of our own stories, and always has been. Documentary itself is sort of stems from a colonial exercise, right? Like anthropology, where folks who usually are not from a community, generally of European descent, go into another community and tell their stories and present their stories to the world, oftentimes through a lens that may not include the actual people who they are filming and who are the subjects of the film. And this is very problematic. So I think what happened literally was online, there was a post about the Tiger Woods doc. There were 2 posts from the directors. And I think for me, what I found particularly problematic, it was, again, the Tiger Woods doc is not new. It is an example of something that happens often, where there is a team that is making a film about a person of color or community of color that where the team does not reflect the community, and the team is not diverse in the way that it should be. And this example I felt was particularly, I think, perhaps triggering for me, just in the fact that there were 2 directors, and neither of the directors were representative of the community Tiger Woods comes from. Again, now Tiger Woods is not anyone's hill to die on. I think we all feel this way. But I think his story as a person of color and the way that he interprets race and feels about it is critical to our society. And again, we live in what is a white supremacist, patriarchal, society. It is also a homophobic society. I think this society, again, the foundation is many of these things. It is a white dominant Christian society that for, and again, to when we talk about white supremacy today, we're not necessarily we're not talking about folks in I think oftentimes we think it is people in capes and hoods, that is what defines white supremacy, but really we're talking about if you're participating in a patriarchal, white supremacist, homophobic society, you have to choose. You're either, benefiting from it and benefiting from the racism that exists, or you are anti-racist. You are either sexist or you are practicing, actively practicing, sort of leading a non-sexist life and making those choices accordingly. The same with homophobia. So what I proceeded to do upon seeing the post about the film was to make a comment, really to raise a question. It was meant to raise a question directed at the directors as to why they chose this film, why they chose to direct this film, and was Sam Pollard, who was on it, the only person of color above the line, which is also an important point. Oftentimes when we staff up our films, we think, well, I have there's a PA who is of color, or there is someone, but those folks don't have a lot of power in the creative process. So I raised that question, and then afterwards thought about it a little bit and was really concerned that I had ended my career, because this is such a tricky conversation in our industry, and still we are. So we have a nation that is absolutely polarized around it, and there is a lot of white fragility. I'm going to remove this because I understand that my mic is maybe making. Hopefully this is better if you guys can hear me. But so essentially after that, I belong to Brown Girls Doc Mafia, which is the group that Ayabo founded, and I confessed what I had done to the group, and also was definitely sort of in fear that I had raised this issue. And interestingly, it was an issue that clearly resonated with a lot of folks, and there was a lively conversation that followed on Facebook about this issue. And the folks who are here today, Grace Lee, Marjan, and Iabo, are all, again, part of Brown Girls, which is, why we this group kind of came together to tackle the response to this issue. And here we are today. And I think this is not it was nothing about this was meant to be personal, but this is an issue that we are grappling with in our society at large. So it seems incredibly important that we as this community also take a look in the mirror to think about these things and think about the role we play. And I have to think about this myself in my daily life. You know, I constantly think about what I am doing. But it's, and the ask is that we all engage in this. And I think I can pass it forward to folks who've been doing this a long time to discuss it further.
Well, before we go any further, I just want to say, you know, it is striking to me. I don't want it to go unnoted, that it's striking to me that you felt you were taking a risk by raising this. And I think that is something that in itself is cause for reflection. If, you know, as we say, the conversation's gone on for a long time. It's not, you know, my favorite example is Aunt Jemima. They just realized that was offensive. No, people have been saying this for a very long time. Yet, you know, for you to raise it felt like a risk for you to do. And hats off to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Okay, so let's turn to other folks who are here today. I don't know which of you wants to go first, but what is your, what did you think when things popped off on Facebook, the conversation that's been happening either privately or publicly for some time suddenly has new energy? What happened for you, Marjan and Yabo and Grace?
I'll jump in if that's okay, and just start with, I think, some framing. You know, as Geeta and you have said, we've been having these conversations kind of amongst ourselves for a long, long time. But now that there's a lot more people coming into the conversation, I found in my experience that when we try to talk about race and documentary, very often things get quickly derailed. I think that for a group, a community of people who sort of consider themselves as standard bearers for kind of justice, that documentary people sort of see themselves that way, it is actually quite hard to process the enormity of the idea of white supremacy kind of in their own practice. And my experience has been that people often confront that discomfort with a bunch of kind of reductive arguments, right? And then those arguments become off-ramps from the conversation. And it keeps us stuck at this level where we kind of have to keep answering the same series of questions. So just in the interest of sort of moving forward, because the fight is important and our time is all precious and it's time for change, I just wanted to kind of frame first what we're not talking about and what we are talking about. So as I've been having these conversations more publicly this last few weeks, I've heard people say, Tiger Woods doesn't think he's black, so if he doesn't care, why do you, right? Or what about that Michael Jordan doc? Nobody freaked out that that was made by a white director. Or I've had conversations where people say, it's true, I make a lot of films about people of color, but I'm not that kind of white filmmaker. Or we do have brown folk. We have, you know, 3 APs who are brown, but as Geeta said, those are not decision-making roles where people really have power to say something. I've heard a lot of, are you saying that we're only allowed to make films about our own direct experience, which I think is sort of implies that there's some kind of documentary jail that someone's going to send you to. And we can have a separate call about whether there should be a documentary jail or not. But the fact is that there isn't one. And I've even heard people say, is that some kind of a call for censorship? Which, you know, really shows how little people understand about countries where actual censorship exists, how that functions. I've heard a lot of, we'd love to have more qualified filmmakers of color, but we don't know where to find them, or we can't find people who are qualified enough. Or we did call XYZ, qualified filmmaker of color, but he or she wasn't available. And then as if that's it, you make one call, that was your try, and now you just sort of move on. And in this IndieWire article that was born out of what happened, we heard there was even a new ism called for by Alex Gibney, which is credentialism, where the proposed solution was, maybe we need like this lower budget stream. It's sort of like a kiddie pool for documentary budgets. And so these kinds of sort of oversimplified responses that often come up, in my opinion, are whiteness trying to protect whiteness from having to look in the mirror and examine itself. And what they do is they deflect the real impacts that white dominant storytelling systems have on how our communities are defined and understood by the world. and they deny an uncomfortable truth that is in our field at this moment, in the golden age of documentary. The wealth, power, and opportunity are indeed hoarded and stockpiled in the hands of white dominant in-groups. So that, if we look at that top echelon, that is what it looks like, right? Mm-hmm. And so, as we've been saying, this is not a new conversation, but the fact that for some people, this was the first awakening to like, oh, what, is just the manifestation, right, of what we know to be true in the world. And so we find ourselves in this moment where the entire country is going through a moment of racial reckoning. We have communities of color that have really organized and built power, and ADOC and Brown Girls Doc Mafia. This is, this moment happened because we've been organizing and behind the scenes for a while now, right? Like building power, and they stand on the shoulders of the organizations before them. And as you just said, Geeta, one brave soul, took this high stakes gamble, right? And she poked the bear in a public forum, and it was this tidal wave that came out after it, right? So, what we are saying is that we just can't be satisfied anymore by diversity initiatives or token hires on projects, right? And a system that we have in which the powerful Black filmmakers or filmmakers of color can be counted on the fingers of one hand, and the gatekeepers of color on this hand, is just not acceptable. That's not what America looks like, and that's not, it's no longer acceptable. So the real question, the one we do want to talk about moving forward, if we can put aside all those things that are just distractions to the conversation, and instead, can we have a conversation from this moment, starting here, moving forward, how do we as a field acknowledge and address and dismantle the systemic and structural racism and inequity that we have built in the nonfiction space, right? And this is a time for our white colleagues and our white adjacent colleagues to take some responsibility for these systems of power that they have built, which if they look around are very much predominantly white, and join us in a commitment to making structural change. Because, we saw a lot of BLM statements, we hear a lot of stuff about, being anti-racist, but unless we really start to make those structural changes, the lip service is not being anti-racist. So my request is no more off-ramp conversations, right? Because if we keep taking the off-ramps, we're never going to get where we need to go. And, I want us to move forward as a community in this conversation, just with this clarity that this is what it looks like. It's not acceptable. And if we all care about this idea of racial justice, then we must all start to work to dismantle it.
So, Grace, what does that look like to you to begin to dismantle it? What does it mean to dismantle it?
First of all, thanks everyone for including me in this conversation. Marsha, I was thinking we both were keynote speakers at Getting Real in 2016. So we've been having this conversation like within this group for a long time, 4 years, right? One of the reasons ADOC was created back in 2016, sort of out of that moment, was because, actually prior to 2016, we've all been having these conversations privately or amongst ourselves for even longer, as long as I've been a filmmaker. Right. And I just don't want to have this conversation anymore. So what are we going to do to build, structures that will help us move more quickly? Like I see the emerging filmmakers in ADOC, and I don't want them to have these same conversations over and over again, because I'm also tired of them. And what Marge, I'm just kind of riffing off what everyone else has said, but what Marge said about this reckoning time, we look at 1968, we look at 2020, these comparisons are being made about, the reckoning that's happening in our society. That's also the time when, organizations like Third World Newsreel were created. That conversation has been happening even longer than, all of us on this Zoom panel. And we have, Brown Girls Doc Mafia, we have the Black Documentary Collective, we have, the more recent Undocumented Filmmakers Collective. A lot of people are creating these other, you know, networks so that we can organize together. And I think that's where a lot of this strength comes from. The other thing that I wanted to mention, you know, it's, you know, when we talk about, you know, solidarity statements and all of this thing, as a non-Black person of color, you know, we also have to deal with these challenges too. It's, as an Asian American, I've been in rooms and conversations where people, you know, are okay with us, you know, it's diverse enough, you know, if you can have like an Asian American on a project, like that's okay, right? I know, Gita, you've been in these conversations as well. And that's also, that's not okay either. And I think, you know, even within ADOC, one of the things that, you know, I hats off to the members of ADOC who started like this Asian Black Solidarity channel discussion that's been happening in a really robust way. You know, we decided to have like an anti-racism workshop as Asian Americans, right? Like no one is immune to this system. White supremacy is a system that affects everybody. You don't get a pass because you're also, you know, not white, and you don't get a pass because you're a woman, right? So, you know, that's something I just wanted to bring up because these challenges face everybody in some way. You know, it's not just, oh, you white filmmakers, you have to deal with this. We all have to deal with it.
And Iyabo, you are the founder of Brown Girls Mafia, which has played an increasingly important role in the field and played a very important role in bringing this whole discussion kind of out in the open. You know, a new kind of injection of this discussion into the public. What are your thoughts on what it means and what we need to be talking about now?
Yeah, and thanks to Firelight and everyone again for having us today and for all the participants for being here. I appreciate, I was so, you know, honored and humbled that Gita found Brown Girls as a place to be vulnerable and a place to find people who are going to believe in her and believe in her word and take that risk with her, you know, because everyone's names are on those posts too. And you know, that kind of anxiety is kind of where Brown Girls was born out of, this feeling of isolation, of tokenism, of if I say one word, I'm gonna lose my job, you know, or I'm gonna be blacklisted, you know. And so we've been talking about it for years, and there are a lot of other ancillary issues that are involved with it that these ladies have been speaking about already. You know, the glass ceiling, folks not getting promoted on the executive side, people not getting opportunities and as they continue in their career, as they become more established. You know, people of color are continually treated as emerging or as beginners over and over and over again. They're not getting the kind of budgets that they should be getting, no matter what stage they're in. You know, the budget of the project should be attached to what the budget is. It's not about, you know, if that person's experience is the same as a white person's experience, they should be getting the same budget, okay? And also, you know, just value systems. I mean, I think a big part of this is the executives and the buyers are bringing in people that they trust, and you have to question that. I think that's the big thing that we have to push our white allies and the folks who aren't allies, who are trying to be allies, to continually interrogate what your value system is and how does that align with where this country and our world is going in terms of anti-racism and anti-Blackness, and seeing an opportunity and seizing it. You know, one of my things that I've been fighting for a long time, you know, is working one-on-one with different organizations, like working with True False, with Camden, like just behind the scenes saying, okay, how can we make these spaces safe for our members? It's not just about posting on Facebook, it's also about being in the room. You know, I've brought hundreds of filmmakers to film festivals now, and every single time we go, there's an incident. Every single time. Something happens that tells this filmmaker that they don't belong there, you know, and that they're not wanted, or they're less than in some way. And I'm sick of fighting that battle, to be honest, you know? We all are, and it's just not, it's not fair. And, you know, that kind of anxiety stuff is not something that we should have to deal with when we're just trying to be creative and professional and make friends, you know? So,
let me just ask you about that,
yeah,
Iyabo, because when I hear you say that, I, first of all, totally agree. And I'm like, we're not gonna fight that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
one of the decisions we made a couple years ago actually is we're not doing panels that have diversity in the title. We're not doing that. Because, I mean, and this is, you know, part of what we did together for Getting Real was the series of panels on decolonizing, because, you know, we've had decades of that now, of that language, of that approach, of that assumption that we will forever be marginal, and therefore we must be integrated into some system, but will forever be marginal. And this, what we're all kind of up to now, feels different to me. And I wonder how you think about that. And I wonder how, what do you think that means in terms of what we want to happen going forward? Because I don't know if I'm not really asking a question. I guess I'm saying, for me, the frame has really shifted now. And it's shifted mostly because of what these young people are doing in the street, and kind of pulling forward the legacy, you know, that Grace spoke to, you know, these people that came before us and have been talking about this and fighting about this. And I just wonder how it feels for you. And, you know, when Marjan says we're done, we've had enough, I just want to understand what that means. What does that mean?
For me, I think it started, I spent probably 5 or 7 years of my career, like I said, having these one-to-one conversations, trying to make change behind the scenes, throwing myself, you know, at the feet of this BS in the industry, you know, always sacrificing my own well-being, right? And then sacrificing the well-being of all these people that I was bringing in the space, right? And I think the turning point for me was at Getting Real, actually, in 2018, when we had our Firelight ADOC Brown Girls Summit, and we had these panels, and we invited everyone, and maybe 10, 15 white people showed up out of 400, you know? And so it was like, oh, we could be doing this on our own time. We don't, you know, this is a shift, like we need to recenter ourselves in a way too. Like maybe it's not about us trying to get them on our page, but let's do our own thing in our own page and try to help people get on board. And so when things like this happen, it's tough because we've been spending the last 2 or 3 years focusing on ourselves, like, you know, working hard, and then something blows up that just keeps dragging us back. And I think we're just done with it, you know? And so this kind of conversation is key to that, that next chapter. The conversations that this team is having with the filmmakers and with the team behind this film, behind the scenes, is a part of that as well. And, you know, we are committed, whether we like it or not, we're committed, you know? And this is something that's not gonna be a month long or 3 months or 6 months. This is forever. We need to make change for real. And so we invite, you know, everyone to be on the same page with us and to take these steps in a real, genuine way that is going to be uncomfortable. And it's going to require some people to sit down, to step back, to uplift other people, to relinquish power, to give up some cash. You know, it's gonna happen. And so let's all be on the right side of history on this situation, you know?
Yeah,
I wonder, Geeta, just for me, I think it is kind of ironic that Tiger Woods was what started all this, and you know that people would. I mean, what's so ironic to me about Tiger Woods is you cannot separate Tiger Woods' story from race. It's impossible. You know, maybe you could make the argument that Michael Jordan is separable, but Tiger Woods, you can't separate it. So, you know, it's so evident to me that, you know, if you don't have a team that can understand that and how his story has worked in the world, then you're not going to get the story right.
No, I think I just want to say too, to add to this, this is not, I mean, when we talk about some of the things that have been talked about before, like the diversity initiative, et cetera, I also want to disabuse sort of people of the concept that that anyone here, like the folks that we are talking about here and all the filmmakers we are talking about here are so incredibly valuable to the process. So it is not just, you know, that folks who are gatekeepers or who have, you know, again, the production companies that are sort of the branded production companies now who keep getting chosen over and over again to, you know, again, and have all the sort for all the work and all the jobs, you know, that is given from, you know, the larger, again, the corporations, because, you know, at that level that there is essentially a huge loss by not having folks who look like us in the room, you know, because you are not telling the whole story. You are not getting the perspective that you are missing out on so much. And so I want to make sure that like moving forward again on this, even though is also a win-win situation in the sense that you have, you know, again, our perspectives are incredibly valuable. And folks have been doing this work, again, despite, like, as Firelight, you know, for all the filmmakers here have been doing the work without necessarily the blessing support of the institutions. So I think that's also an incredibly important point. The story of Tiger Woods, I as you said, is critical. It's critical, the way that he interprets race, and the way that he sees himself and the way that he identified was critical. I mean, I could also, I think, for example, and again, do we all feel that, you know, we would have wanted to make that film? Not necessarily, but the perspective is important. You know, it is important to have a team, and again, people in positions of power who can speak to that issue, you know, and not just one person. Again, it has to be multiple. I think, though, too, what's really important is that it was to point out is that for that film itself, it was HBO Sports that the project stems from. It was HBO Sports that was at the sort of the top level of that team. And I think that, again, at the gatekeeping level, it really stems from folks who are putting the money into this. You know, first of all, at that level too, things have to shift. The same asks that the filmmakers, again, everyone, it's hard to be a filmmaker. It's impossibly hard. Everyone is just trying to make some money and get their thing funded. So, but it's at the top level that we really have to ask for the most change as far as, you know, executives. We need diversity. We need, again, I'm using that word that we're not supposed to use, but we need to see that at the executive level, it needs to look like America. It needs to look like, you know, we need to have that at the top levels. And then folks at those levels also need to think about where is their money going? Again, and I think we are now, as someone said to me, we have left the golden age of docs. We're now in the corporate age of docs. Mm-hmm. And this whole branded money thing is an issue.
Let's talk about money, because, you know, all of us are old enough, well, most of us, I will speak for myself, no one else, to remember when, you know, docs were the province of PBS alone. And now, yeah, maybe it is a corporate age of docs. And I wonder what you all think about the structural issues there as they pertain to filmmakers of color, women of color filmmakers in particular. When you have, you know, an insatiable corporate beast that's looking for more and more and more and more content, is sometimes looking for so much content that if you ask me, their own kind of internal judgment is not sufficient to even judge the quality of all the content that they set in motion. Yet the demand is so great, and their perception of the companies or filmmakers that can pull off this work is very narrow.
Well, and also, Marcia, there's it's this idea of hoarding. So one would, a logical brain, right? If you explain it to a 6-year-old and you said there's all this new opportunity, does that mean everyone's going to get more pie? A 6-year-old would say, yes, that makes sense, right? But that's not what's happening. There's all this additional opportunity. There's all this extra hours of programming, but those hours are still going to like 10 production companies who each are carrying 10, 20 projects, right? And so if those ones, just talking about the top end of the field, if those ones are not practicing a full structural kind of rethink about how their process has to be inclusive in a really authentic way. I just want to pick up on something that Geeta said. Yes, Tiger Woods' story is super important, but we're not saying you just need to hire brown people for your brown people stories, right? We're saying that, like, look outside, walk in the street. What does that look like? What does America look like to you? That is what your spaces need to look like too, right? So it's not the one black person that you call, or the one brown person that you call, or the you know, well, oh, we got a brown project, let's make sure we find a brown person, right? Like that may be the stepping stone that we have to pass through, but that's not what it looks like to have an anti-racist structure, right? A structure where there is a level playing field. That looks very different. So the corporatization has created these kind of superstructures in some of these mega production companies, and most of those are very white. There are women in there. They are predominantly male still, right? And you know, this is why I say whiteness has to be willing. We can't fix this problem from the outside. Whiteness has to be willing to look itself internally and start to make the changes internally. However, one of the things that's been born out of this moment is an understanding that the limits sometimes of their imaginations is a new diversity initiative, right? So you can't solve a problem from the same thinking that created it. And so one of the ways that we've been working behind the scenes just in this last few weeks, as if we all didn't have enough on our plates already, is to sort of really try to create this infrastructure. I've been keeping half an eye on the chat. It's an ecosystem problem, right? It's not these 10 production companies. It's not those 6 buyers. You know, it's not these, 3 institutions. It's literally an entire ecosystem. Everyone, it's agencies, it's critics, it's universities and colleges. It's a practice of teaching filmmaking in a way that, where we don't talk about other forms of storytelling, where we don't really debunk what is extractive filmmaking and what isn't, right? So we just need like a full system rehaul. There's nobody who benefits or makes work or money from the production of nonfiction. We're talking about Discovery TV as well, right? We're just talking about the entire chain. And that is the level of work which needs to happen now, right? If we're going to actually see change. So what we are doing behind the scenes, us and another group of people who we couldn't have on here because then we'd all be teeny tiny little squares, is we're trying to build a framework for that conversation, right? And we understand that we kind of need to go sector by sector, category by category. And with each sector, we have to sort of give a clear list of these are not demands, right? We're not chaining ourselves to fences here, but like, here are our suggestions. Like, here are all the places that we see literally at every level where you can make a change and it isn't going to be that difficult. What Yabo said earlier about career development. I mean, there are a handful of brown women executives. In fact, we were talking to some of them the other day and I said, what about the brown men executives, And they said, there's one that we can think of. One, right? Like, this just we can't be okay with it. There's no more to discuss about it. Like, it's just not okay. Great, we all agree. So what now, right? And that's the place that we're at. So what we're hoping to do over the course of the next couple of weeks is sort of really make sure that this document that we're creating is quite thorough, and then start to make a series of invitations. And I know a bunch of them are listening to us now on this call, and a bunch of them are having people send them the notes for what they heard on this call. So I just want to use the opportunity to be super clear, right? We're going to be we're going to be reaching out, and we're going to be asking you to come with your colleagues, with your other production companies, with your other buyers, with your other institutions, with your other philanthropy partners, in pods of, sector. Come and let's have this conversation, right? And let us be very, very clear with you about where the changes need to happen. And then we get to see, how committed are you? Are you actually going to do this or not? Grace, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, yes, that's a conversation with gatekeepers, institutions, but filmmakers can do this also. I mean, it was not hard. I mean, ADOC in 4 years, and Brown Girls, I mean, has exploded. And, for example, I mean, Marge and I made And She Could Be Next, where we really lived the values that we believe in terms of how to make films, right? We had an all women of color crew. It was not difficult to find really accomplished, Gita is one of them, members of the crew to help make this project about women of color transforming American politics. It's something that every filmmaker can do. Maybe you're not gonna, it will just make your project better. I think we only benefited from having a really inclusive team. And I think that that's something everyone who is listening to this call can do right now. You may not be a gatekeeper, but you're the gatekeeper of your own film and the way that you decide to build your team.
Let me invite our viewers to, some of you have started to do this, but if you have questions for the panel, to drop them in the Q&A.
Can I just add one thing quickly, Marcia, while we're
Yeah,
doing
sure,
that?
go ahead.
We're here talking about race, and I want to be really, really conscious that it's not just an issue of race. We are talking about race. I don't want to off-ramp us for that conversation. But the disability community, they've been organizing, right? Queer folk. Like, I don't want it to sound like we don't see other people and understand that they also have these structural impediments to them, right? But it's just very hard to be kind of have a clear conversation when you're sort of very broad. So I just want to acknowledge that we see and understand these other communities are struggling and fighting in the same ways that we are. And if we can fix the thinking, then it should have a benefit for all sorts of groups.
As has been the case throughout history, right?
Indeed.
We'll build on each other. Who was talking? Didn't somebody have a hand up? Okay, well, several people have asked. I don't know if you are ready to say anything about the outcome of your conversations, if those things are still in process. And Marjan, you've said that this is not the end. So this conversation is kind of not a preview, but the appetizer for the entree that is to come, which will be a kind of set of ideas and discussions that will roll out in the next few months. Is that what you imagine?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we're as I said, one of the wonderful things about being a brown person who's constantly trying to fight is that whatever else you had on your to-do list that day gets bumped because you have to get engaged in this bloody conversation again. Sorry, I'm swearing. And do the work again, right? So somehow we are trying to do that. We are trying to have this massive, thoughtful, strategic, structural change initiative idea list come out of not being paid to do it, not being able to be in an office together. Like, this is what it looks like to organize, right? This is what organizers have always done. So we are working on that. We are starting a series of conversations. Our own Nucleus working group includes people who have all sorts of experience as well. So we have some executives on there, people who basically have been in the rooms. Gita, do you mind telling your James Brown story? I just think it's such a clear story, and I think it's such a good example. Do you mind just talking about that for a second, or does it make you uncomfortable?
I would think, and I think this might speak to, I don't think I'm the only person who has had this experience, but there have just been, again, I have been on many productions, including that where I was the only person of color on the team, on the team that was actually making the film, on the production team. And I think for, and many times, as Grace has said, I have been sort of the adjacent person, the race adjacent person on stories about Muslim women, on stories about, again, about Black folks that
You're close enough.
Yeah, I'm South Asian, and I think that, of course, I'm always, I appreciate the faith in my skill, but it is critical to me that my team, again, reflect the community that we are going to be talking about, or the community that is the subject of the film. And then I think, again, for authenticity and integrity, I refuse, I cannot speak for this community. Mm-hmm. So there has to be someone who has equal say on the team. And again, if it's one director, it can be my producer, but my producer has equal say, equal creative say. And when there is something to talk about, that they are there with me. When there's something, you know what I mean? If there is an award, they are there. They speak first if they are of the community, and I'm not. It is just, again, about stepping aside, sometimes trying to step aside. And so I think these are personal practices, but I don't think I'm alone in this. I think this is a constant battle that Iyabo has brought up, where you are the only person in the room, and oftentimes you can feel very gaslit. And I think an easy way to think about this is also, this can happen to women all the time, right? You know what it is like. Folks might know what it is like if you identify as female, to be the only one person in the room and with a group of men. Now, I think we would not, in this day and age, hopefully, maybe it would happen, but make a film about, say, here, we're going to make a film about women and, or an important woman, and have one woman on the team. That would be bizarre, right? So I think it's, as far as this goes, it's the same asks. You know, it's fairly simple.
Yeah, not a token. Being a token is not a happy place to be.
It's super challenging, and it is not, and it is unfair. Everyone loses. Like no one, does not do well for the team making who wants to make the film, nor does it do well for the person who is the token.
Well, let me pose one question that was dropped in the chat. The question is about balancing taking risk and going with people and teams that are familiar, which I'm not sure is actually, those things are in opposition to each other. And I'm guessing here because whoever wrote this question didn't say, but one of the things that I'm guessing is behind it is, for a lot of small production companies led by white filmmakers, they have teams of people that they have worked with perhaps for years that they have come to rely on. And the question is, well, if I want to be more diverse, or if anyone wants to be more, have a more balanced crew, how do I think of that? Do you think it's a risk?
Go on, Yabo.
If I can jump in, there's, I mean, there's a resource on the Brown Girls website, the Brown Girls Like Mafia. It's the FAQ. I'll put it in the chat. But it's how to be an ally, how to be a better ally is the last question on there. And the thing is that we don't have enough friends of color, not we, but some people don't have enough friends of color. So I get it. There's a way that the film industry has been set up, that you work with people that are familiar, people that remind you of yourself, of your younger self, people that went to the same college you went to, or came up in the same way that you came up, or worked on a film that you identify with in some way, etc. I get that. We need to interrogate that. But also, all of those things all those categories are things that you can do something about, like starting today. You can, it doesn't matter if you're like, oh shit, I don't have like a really close group of brown friends who make films. Hey, we're all here, we're here to do our own work. But I think it sounds kind of silly. I don't want to sound juvenile, but making friends is, I think, part of that first step. Like, it really is, because you want to work with people. You want to be on set for 15 hours. You want to be on that airplane in the hotel room with people that you like, right? People that you're friends with. And so I think we, as adults, we have to interrogate like who we make friends with and why. Not just to use them, of course, to be your token, whatever, but to see the value in that individual, including their race. Like, we're not talking about race blind friendship here. Like, my Blackness is a part of who I am too, so that those things can all live together. So in the question about taking risks, I think it's about being preparing yourself, setting yourself up for success, so that you don't have to take a risk. You already have your bank of people that you've been friends with for years, or even friends with for a few months, that you met at a festival that you're like, man, that guy was super cool. His film was really nice, blah, blah, blah. I got a good recommendation. I chatted with him on Zoom. The kind of relationship building that you do with any other person is the same kind of relationship building you can do with a brown person who works in film starting today. It's really not that hard. But there's a whole thing on this FAQ about how to be a better ally. And I think, we should just question the feelings of familiarity, because that familiarity is what continues to hold us in one place, right? It doesn't allow us to grow as individuals or as an industry. So that's kind of where I fall in.
Also, it kind of falls back into this myth we all tell ourselves, that somehow we're all these extraordinary talent, like, it's just not true. It's just not true. There are dozens and dozens of whatever it is you need. You need a DP, you need a director, you need a producer, you need an editor. There are dozens of people who are just as talented as you, who are diverse, come from different backgrounds, will bring fresh eyes and new perspectives, will make you laugh, will bring good food to the office that is different from the, same salad you order every day. Like, we're fun. We're nice people. You know, we were just looking at something we were cutting from, and She Could Be Next, where Pramila Jayapal, the, you know, representative from Washington State, says, it's not just that you should have a brown girl in the photo because it makes the photo look better, although it always does, right? It's kind of that idea. So I sort of reject a little bit. I understand you have to work a little harder. Yeah, if you don't have, if it's not in your natural network, you have to work a little harder. You have to make a couple more calls. Instead of being able to crew up in 2 days, it may take you 2 weeks, right? But I sort of reject the idea of risk because it continues to play in this kind of reinforcement of an idea that somehow brown folk can't, you know, are a risk. It's just not true.
It's interesting. I've, you know, since the call out, I got many phone calls from white filmmaker friends, and it's just been interesting to, you know, be really frank. You know, I think Gita.
What they say?
What can I do? You know, like I want to respond on Matt Heinemann's Facebook page, but I don't know what to say. Am I going to make it about myself? I mean, I appreciate these questions. I mean, it's what Yaba was saying before about your friends. I mean, you know, I have lots of white filmmaker friends, and I welcome these conversations because they weren't asking them before, you know? And I think that I'm, you know, I don't want to do all the labor because, you know, I've been doing it a lot. And one of the reasons we're doing this Zoom call is so we don't have to say this thing over and over again. But I do think, you know, friendship is difficult. I mean, you rely on your friends to be frank with you, and, you know, maybe that will help you look inside and see where you can improve, like if you want to maintain the friendship.
Mm. Well, what does, I just have a question, because, you know, we also have our film school or our friends that are on our crews too, but maybe we don't get the money to do the project. And I guess I'm wondering, I know we're getting close to time, but what are your thoughts on, what's your kind of vision if you were to throw us 10 years ahead? We've talked a lot about how the changes that need to happen are systemic. We've talked about how they have to happen in every piece of that ecosystem. But if you were to close your eyes and imagine 10 years from now, what an ecosystem that's better looks like, what do you see, Gita?
I just want to say that I think that the original ask, you know, or the thing that I sort of speak about, or that the intention of the original sort of post that set this off is really the vision of an equitable playing field. Like, I think equity and equality for all of us is really what is my dream in this field. And again, if we were to have an equitable playing field, then it's like, of course, everyone, the idea of anyone can sort of tell everybody's stories, you know, like we can, again, if there was, if everyone's team looks like America, if these corporate structures look like America, I think that, you know, it's really that equity and equality that is so critical to getting us, you know, once we are there, I think we can talk, you know, we can talk a lot more about the, you know, like the art of this, you know, about the sort of but until we are, unless we get there, until we're there, that it sort of becomes like a Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter conversation that I feel like we're having here. Like right now, most BIPOC, like there's so many BIPOC filmmakers who are shut out of telling their own stories, let alone stories about anyone else, right? So it's like if we're continually shut out of telling stories about even folks in our community, what hope is there for us to tell stories about, again, anything? Where is the access? And again, as Marjan said, we shouldn't just be relegated. No one should just be relegated, ideally, to telling stories about their own community, because a good filmmaker can make a story about anything. But until there's equity and equality, it's impossible. You know, So this is, for me, one of the biggest issues. And one of the conversations I repeatedly have feels like that, the all filmmakers' lives matter conversation versus the Black Lives Matter conversation. So that's
And it's twisted even further by the idea that we are in an endlessly competitive landscape, So, Iabo can put out a list of women of color who can crew, and the pushback is, well, you're going to cut into my business if these women get hired.
Forgive me, but it also too, I want to say that there are corporations out here too that will not approve those people. Like, for example, I want to say that, for example, Netflix has a list of approved people that they I have been told that there's like a list of approved editors and a list of approved. So who are those people? Right. And how does anyone get a foot in the door? Like, again, you have to do something for them to be approved. And if you can't, then if you don't have the access to do something for them, unless you're approved, how do you get in? And unless you film at Sundance, which how many films actually make it into that? And then you're approved automatically. But what are the chances?
And it's interesting because it really isn't a matter of scarcity of money. That's not the issue. I mean, there really is enough pie.
I was going to just say, Marsha, I mean, I think equity, equality, the harder words are power and money, right? Power and money are, really intrinsic to this. And also, I think, transparency is one of those buzzwords, but the facts of the matter are there's a massive, massive number of people who are trying to do this work, right? A tiny percentage of them even understand how stacked the deck is, right? So when Gita just says that, there is a list, I'm going to venture to guess that most people don't think that there's a list. And when you think about the top tier festivals, there are also relationships that are already in place because there are like funding relationships, which mean that like X number of projects from whatever person who funded us this thing are going to get in, right? So there's this whole community of people with, with blood, sweat, and tears. And I want to acknowledge this because I know that we are in there's a scarcity problem in our business. And so when you're already living in a scarcity lifestyle, and then someone comes along to you and says, hey, white person, you need to back off, right? That feels like an assault. And I understand that defensiveness because it's not like everyone is thriving. We just don't, but there is enough money. It just isn't distributed, right, evenly. But also we have to understand, we have to tell the truth about what happened. How do these systems work? And that's a very simple place that our allies in those positions of power can start with, is like, do the count and tell us what the number is. We know enough people who have been in those rooms that we know what your numbers are. We know that they're not good. And we know that it doesn't count when you call that, one guy in accounting to suddenly count him in your number, or the intern, right? Because now the number looks so bad. And I think the discomfort that Iabo talked about before is just the looking in the mirror. And if you can actually look at what you see, and instead of like wallowing in some kind of self-flagellation about that, like make a plan to change it, right?
Make a plan.
But we need to know these things. We need to know who are these lists. I know Iabo is like the high priestess of list making, God bless her. And has inspired. So I know that editors, are making lists. Here are the queer editors, here are the BIPOC editors, DPs are doing it. Like we're all making the wretched lists because we can't hear one more time that you don't know or there isn't anyone qualified. It's just not true. So, these two halves have to come together, right? Like one set of people has to stop putting their fingers in their ears and going la 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 la. We've got to be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, but I'm going to go to you, but let me just say we're going a little bit over time. We're not going to go too much more over time. So those of you who can hang with us for another 5 minutes, I'd say, and then we'll bring it to a close. Iabo?
If we have time, and if you want to share the preview of the Brown Girls data directory, we can do that. But so Brown Girls is going to launch soon. This is a sneak peek of the Brown Girls directory that we're building. It's going to launch probably in the next week or two. It's going to have as many members as we can get on there. And it's beautiful. I'm excited about it. I want you guys to use it. But the thing that Marjan just said that still gives me anxiety is that even when I spend a bunch of money and a bunch of time to make this beautiful document, I'm still going to get phone calls about, well, can you vouch for this person? What have they really done? And like, there's so many names, I can't read all this and that, So it's not about just knowing that there's a list or having access to the list. it's about taking the time and the gumption and the genuine interest and the money to go through these lists and look at what opportunities there are for changing this world and the system and this industry, because there are countless organizations that are collecting ourselves for this purpose. We are ready, you know? And so people just don't have excuses anymore. So, you know, when it comes out, take a look. I'll try to be less angry about it moving forward.
No, well, and never let it be said again that we can't find anybody. So
We also have a
Because,
ADOC. ADOC also has a database of crew. I mean, lots of people are looking for, I notice a lot of jobs coming up about, do you have any Mandarin speakers or Hindi or, you know, things like that. And, you know, I mean, we're not just here for our language skills, but, you know, that is something
It's
that
an
people
asset,
just
yeah.
do some work. We've done a lot of work putting these things together. Other people can do some work and just vetting them yourselves and like finding the, you know, finding the references and looking at their actual work and, you know, deciding for yourself if it matches your project.
And
Can we
just
put
quickly
those
for the,
references in the chat to make sure?
Yeah.
The BDC also, the Black Documentary
Yeah.
Collective.
Undocumented filmmakers
Undocumented.
collective.
Yeah.
Yes.
everybody has one. I just want to say also that our list and everyone else's list, we're not just filmmakers, we're also executives. They're people who know this work and or either who were filmmakers and are transitioning into being executives. And just because we didn't start in a mailroom 10 years ago doesn't mean we can't do your job, honestly. So please also, gatekeepers who are listening, consider how people can do some lateral moves into a new space, into the executive space, because they have the experience through working in the field. So let's dismantle the pipelines that exist right now through this mailroom thing and all these other systems, and think about the quality of the person, what their abilities are, their learning ability, you know, and how they can contribute to your team. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands if anyone wants to make some final or concluding thoughts. But want to say thank you to all of you for this is an extraordinary panel and discussion. Thank you again, Geeta, for taking the steps that you took, and the rest of you for participating and opening the door for all of us to have an important discussion. I know that this is not the end. That's the most important thing. This is actually the beginning, so that we will all be paying attention. We'll all be looking for ways that we can connect and support the initiatives that you will be rolling out after this, and look forward to collaborating with all of you in the future.
Marsha, can I say one last
Sure.
thing?
Absolutely.
I doubt that there is a person on this Zoom who can't this afternoon, there's a weekend coming up. This weekend, right? Like sit down for a minute, take a piece of paper out, have a good think, and have a think about where are the places that you can start some change now, right? And there is, like, we all know the entire ecosystem of human beings. You know, when you look at the credits on a film, there's a lot of people who touch a piece of work. Post-production facilities, color facilities, sound facilities, agents, publicists, like all of you touch this, are part of this ecosystem. Every single person can now, today, at least do the inventory, right? And then start to at least have a small plan for where can this change happen. And in the meantime, we're gonna come out with some of the big ideas, that the big systems that are harder to shift, you know, can start to adopt. But literally there's not one person who touches documentary film who can't do better in some way in service of a world that we all say that we want, where your race does not diminish you in any way. I mean, we all believe that. I know we all believe that. So what is the 5 things you can do, you know, this weekend to at least get clear for yourself? I really ask people to take that responsibility.
I think that's a fantastic way to end. If you're still on, you can drop your 5 ideas in the chat, or if you have 3, you can drop them in the chat. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to have a closing thought? Yaba, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna say that I'm building a list of allies, actually, to share with my sisters and everyone in POC spaces. So I'm gonna put that ally list in the chat right there. If you're an ally, you wanna make yourself known and put yourself to work, be put to work by us in our groups, sign up on that list. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, my career has always been supported. I mean, again, by many allies. There have been folks in these spaces who have taken care of me, who have believed in me, who have, seen me through, from executives to, folks who are executive producers. So obviously I think that's incredibly important, what Ayabo just said. Again, this is a future we all want to see, and I do believe we can get there together. It's just, again, we just have to kind of cast aside our own bullshit, forgive me, but just like kind of see through it. We've done it, and so, there's work to do around all these issues, and sometimes policy follows culture, leads culture, and so we could be ahead of the curve in this. We can implement things, even if the rest of the country and other sort of parts of our world are lagging. I really think that we could lead this, so that is my hope.
Opportunity.
I would just add that what Geeta did 3 weeks ago now, has engendered like all of this, which is great. And this conversation is going to continue, and we should all have it together. I hope Firelight or whoever can convene more of these things, because it's not just conversations with the roundtables, the executives. Again, that's becoming more behind closed doors, but these public forums are where, everyone has access.
Exactly. Well, we'll do what we can to support it. Anything we can do, we'll support it.
We appreciate you, Marcia and
well,
Stanley, and
thank you.
everything you've built for our community.
Well,
We
thank
stand
you
on your
all.
shoulders.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for today. Extraordinary, again. More to come soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Right?
Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Beyond Resilience. Thank you to Marcia, our moderator, and our panelists, Iyabo, Geeta, Grace, and Marjan, as well as our ASL interpreter, Andrea. Join us for our next Beyond Resilience conversation entitled The Life and Legacy of John Lewis, happening on August 7th. See the link in the chat to register, and please visit firelightmedia.tv for more information on the series.